All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Week 11 Fantasy Life live stream. I'm Matthew Freedman here with Chris Allen, and we are talking about the entire Week 11 slate via your fantasy football questions. Chris, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. I've been traveling for the last couple of days, so I'm trying to catch up as quickly as possible on the latest news. It seems like there are a couple of last-minute injuries. I didn't even know about the CD Lamb stuff that happened that popped up on Friday, so I'm trying to catch up as quickly as possible. But to your point, Matt, we're here to answer as many questions as possible over the next hour, hour and a half, so happy to dive into it.
Yeah, and the CD Lamb thing, good news on that is it looks like pretty minor. Reporting is that they're fully expecting him to play, so that is good. But yes, we will go through all of the fantasy football questions you have. And let me rephrase that. We're not going to hit all the questions you have. We're going to hit some of the questions you have. My general feeling is that if you have like a very basic question, you can obviously ask us and we'll give the context around how it is that we would think about that question, the way we would go, but also you can use the free start sit tool that we have on the site. You can use the free rankings that we have on the site. If you are a Fantasy Life Plus subscriber, which I highly recommend that you choose to do that, you can use the projections that we have on the site. I have my own personal projections on the site, and then there are also the official site projections, which are managed by the ever sharp Dwayne McFarland. And then, of course, there's all the content on the site. So we'll get to as many of your questions as we can while trying to answer them as fully as we can. But of course, if we don't get to your questions, use the site and the resources we have there. All right, let's start to get into the questions here. First one, Henry or Hill for tight end, and Etienne, Johnston, BTJ, or Cooper in the flex for PPR. All right, let's start at the tight end. I love Taysom Hill this week. I also love Henry. Both of these guys I mentioned in Freedman's favorites this week. So it's not like I'm sort of like Sophie's choice torn between these two. I prefer Taysom Hill in general. I think the setup is amazing for him. So last week he had a season high 63% route rate, and that's without Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Bub Means. All three of those guys are still out. Cedric Wilson back in, but I don't think that really makes a difference. He's not like a needle mover. And then you also have still out Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams. So I think that means you have more opportunities for routes and targets, more opportunities for carries, and of course, like the same opportunities for goal line carries. You have the Saints at home. So that is at least like a advantageous situation. The line has shifted from Saints being favored to Browns being favored. And I generally agree with that market move. Still, I think Taysom Hill is going to have, like, this is a close game either way. It's moved from Saints favored by 1.5 to Saints as underdogs of 1.5. We're all in the same vicinity there. I think Taysom Hill has a really good chance of replicating, like a 60% route rate and also getting like the 4 to 6 carries per game that we've generally seen from him since he returned from injury. So given that usage, I go with Taysom Hill at tight end. Nothing wrong with Hunter Henry. He leads the Patriots in basically all receiving categories. Nothing wrong with him at all, but I just prefer Taysom Hill. I think he's going to have more dependable usage, especially near the goal line. But what are your thoughts on Henry versus Hill?
No, I generally agree. If you wanted to get a tight end that can produce at a similar route rate or has a similar route rate, I think Taysom Hill has that for Hunter Henry. But to your point earlier, Freedman, I think that Hill has lesser competition around him for targets. We've seen the Patriots so far over the past couple of weeks as they've tried to integrate more of the younger players into the offense. We've seen more from Jalen Polk. We've seen more from, any of the guys, really, Demario Douglas, any of the other pass catchers and the wide receivers associated with the Patriots. We've seen more of them getting involved, whereas out of the Saints pass catching core, nobody really has too much confidence around starting any of it. Maybe if you want to go back to that MVS train from last week. But outside of that, I would say Hill has the best path to getting reliable target share. And also with his usage as a rusher around the goal line, he has the better path to fantasy production for this week. So I think it's Hill, but it's a good question. Both should be in a similar tier. But I would say that given the matchup and also the level of production or opportunities we should see between the two of them, I lean towards Hill.
All right. And then the next question there from Todd Culver, Etienne, Johnston, Brian Thomas, and Cooper for the flex in PPR. I'm assuming this is Amari Cooper and not Cooper Kupp. Although with Amari Cooper, I think it's worth noting the wrist injury, there's no guarantee that he's playing this week. He's been limited in practice every day this week, questionable. It was the same thing last week, didn't play. The same thing the week before that, and he didn't play.
Right.
So, like, if I'm a betting person, I'm tentatively projecting him to be out this week. If he's in, very different circumstances because no Keon Coleman, no Dalton Kincaid, he could really be like the target earner on that team this week. So it would be good circumstances for him, but you just cannot depend on him actually playing this week, especially because let me just check. That is a later game in the afternoon. So you don't want to depend on Amari Cooper and then have him be out. So I think you basically have to scratch him from this. So then I would say you're looking at Etienne, Quentin Johnston, Brian Thomas. I am tentatively going Etienne, and it hurts me to say that because like he has really underperformed to this point this season, but Tank Bigsby is out. And so you are hoping that Etienne is able to get a lot of that workload. Now you have to take into account the fact that he is a massive underdog. The Jags 13.5-point underdogs on the road. I mean, like it could be a situation where Etienne, especially because he's not as good of a pass catcher as we had hoped he would be coming out of college years ago, that he just does not get as much work as we would hope. But still, I mean, he's got a good chance of having more than 10 touches in this game. So I feel like I would be going with him. But what are your thoughts?
Did I catch that right? Did you say if you were a betting person? Aren't you a betting person?
I'm a betting person. Yeah.
But I'm with you. Actually, I noted the wrist injury for Amari Cooper in my wide receiver cornerback matchups column this week. That should be live on the site. Go ahead and check that out. And he is wearing a cast. You can see the tweet that I embedded into the piece. He's wearing the cast, trying to get used to having that on there because his pass catching acumen has been like one of this between the route running, being able to catch some of those intermediate to deep targets, being able to secure some of those pass attempts down the field. I mean, it has been his calling card for a number of years. And so if we're not going to see Keon Coleman this week, no more Dalton Kincaid, that would lend itself to more opportunities going Amari Cooper's way. But if he's going to see a healthy dose of Trent McDuffie on the outside, he has been one of the more premier corners like in the league catching some of the outside receivers so far this season. I would have some hesitation about starting him. I'm with you. I would say that getting the level of touches we would expect for Etienne, even if it is a better matchup, I would take the floor over whatever could be the potential ceiling for Amari Cooper and what we at least would hope would be a back and forth matchup between the Bills and the Chiefs.
All right. So next question here from TB12 BB6. Shout out, by the way. I believe we have had him ask questions before in the live stream. Welcome back to the show, TB12. All right. Pick 2: Higgins, Jennings, Mooney, McConkey. All right. So T. Higgins has been out for a few weeks, was limited in practice this week, but totally cleared on the injury report. So Higgins is playing in this game. And I'm assuming if he's playing in this game, he's close to full health. Like, I don't think this is going to be a situation with T. Higgins that we've seen in the past where he's limited and he's basically just a decoy out there. Like, I think this is Higgins coming back. We should expect something close to the full T. Higgins workload. Jawan Jennings in a great situation with no Brandon Ayuk. So has a real chance to function as one of the top pass catchers in that offense. Darnell Mooney has been one of the surprises of the season where he's functioned as a high-end wide receiver too. And then McConkey in an offense that is starting to lean more and more into the pass with the Chargers. He is also an intriguing option. How are you looking at these four and starting to decide who it is that you're eliminating?
No, folks see the hats like sitting around me, like, you know, got so I'll Bengals bias aside. It would be T first and foremost out of that bunch. In the 5 games that he was active and starting, 29% target share, and that was ahead of Jamar Chase. And you can use our utilization game logs that's available on the site if you have the tier 2 subscription to go through and check out what that sample looked like for T Higgins when he was healthy. I think it was his first game back though. That was was where he did have the lower end target share, 16% in week 3 in his first game back. But after that, 32%, 34%. I mean, 4 games straight over 30% target share. So you might see a slow ramp up this week, but in another must-have game for the Bengals, I would expect him to be more of a full go, and you should get the similar number of opportunities for T. Higgins this week. But out of those other guys that are listed there, from McConkey, we've seen some of the targets start to shift more towards Quentin Johnston. Will Dissly has also been involved, and of course, the running backs involved there should get also a decent amount of targets there as well. So out of that group, I would say it's Higgins and Mooney for me, just given Mooney's upside, and also not that the hip pointer is still part of an issue for Mooney, but just the injury concerns just within that pass core in general. I would say it'd be those two. I'd also I would say Jennings is probably the easy third after that, but I would say Higgins and Mooney for me.
Okay. I have McConkey, Jennings, and Mooney all really close in my rankings. I'm partial to McConkey, just because I think he is ascending, and I think he's in an offense that is improving each week. And then the Bengals pass defense is pretty exploitable. With Juwan Jennings, any given week, it wouldn't be a surprise if he had a really good game, and it wouldn't be a surprise if he had 2 targets. You know what I mean? It's just kind of based on what it is that the 49ers decide to do. And then Darnell Mooney, tough matchup. Now, he is not going to draw number 1 cornerback Pat Surtain. I'm assuming Surtain is going to shadow Drake London most of this game, which could make Mooney an actually really intriguing option, but still a tough all-around pass game matchup for the Falcons in this spot, especially on the road. And so I just put it all together. Higgins is the clear number 1 for me in this group. And then after that, I'd probably lean towards McConkey, but it is really close between McConkey, Jennings, and Mooney. All right, next question here. Jakobi Meyers or Davante Adams? This is so good. This is I feel like such a meta question. Jakobi Meyers, obviously, as the number 1 wide receiver with the Raiders, now that Davante Adams is gone, Davante Adams reunited with his former quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, with the Jets. Of course, Davante Adams having to fight with Garrett Wilson for targets and kind of losing that battle. And that Jets offense really still struggling to come together. Whereas Jakobi Meyers, in the absence of Davante Adams, I mean, he's been earning targets. He's looked like a legit player. And he was one of the guys that I did write up in my Freedman's Favorites article this week. Really do like the situation for him. So I'm probably going Jakobi Meyers. I will just say, so blanket statement, suboptimal quarterback situation. One of the worst quarterback situations in the league. And I had an article that came out on Friday looking at the 2025 NFL draft and projecting where the quarterbacks might go. I'm expecting that the Raiders will address their quarterback situation this offseason. Just totally subpar situation for them. Still, Meyers, 2 games without Davante Adams since Meyers came back from the ankle injury that sidelined him for week 6 and 7. In those 2 games, 18 targets, 157 yards, a touchdown, 14 receptions. Coming off of the bye, Meyers should be fully healthy, ready to go against the Dolphins, who are number 31 in defensive pass DVOA against number 1 wide receivers. So situationally, I think a really good spot for Meyers, even though Dolphins are big favorites in this spot. I think that just means Raiders will need to lean a little bit more into the pass game, which could mean extra targets for Jakobi Meyers. So I'm going with Meyers in the spot. What are you thinking, Chris?
100% with you on that one. Our start sit tool agrees with both of us as well. And I would say the other point going in the favor of Meyers is Davante Adams' health. He was popped up with an illness earlier this week. He did get in a couple of limited practices, should be available for today. But still, if we're trying to split hairs here, I know these are fairly tough in terms of where both of those wide receivers lie in the rankings. So if we're trying to split hairs and look at whose situation may or may not be better, I would say that Jakobi Meyers, looking at his opportunity in the last 3 or 4 weeks after Davante Adams left the Raiders. I mean, over 25% target share in every game so far. And I know we try and use rate stats in order to give you the context behind how much workload these players are seeing. But just reading off, you can just go, this is stuff that's available on Pro Football Reference. Just go and look at Meyers' box scores. 10 targets, 9 targets, 6 targets, 11 targets in his game before going into the bye. I'll take the guy getting that level of target share or that level of work compared to Davante Adams, who's been battling against Garrett Wilson over the past few weeks. I know things have started to come up to where it's the two of them essentially working as the wide receiver 1A, 1B type situation for the Jets. But going up against the Colts now, who have gotten better from a defensive standpoint with a lot of their defensive linemen getting healthy, and we've seen a number of times Aaron Rodgers taking some sacks, I would take Jakobi Meyers in this one, just given the target share.
Yeah, and let me just add just one more wrinkle of context into this. So I guess maybe 2 wrinkles. One is that, like, okay, if I'm looking for the floor, I'm probably going with Jakobi Meyers. If I'm looking for the ceiling, I'm probably going with Davante Adams, even though I still think the ceilings might not be all that different from them. And then the second thing is, like, I'll just say full disclosure, this is a little bit of a vibes take for me. Like, I do have Davante Adams as the higher ranked player in my rankings. And it's not like by an insignificant amount. But like that said, like, and so like if I'm just looking at these 2 players, my own team, if I'm having to make a decision, like I'm a weak man. I'm spineless. I would probably go with Davante Adams, but in my heart, I would be like, no, vibes based. I should put in Jakobi Meyers. So I know I'm just sort of like undermining what I've said by being like, I love Jakobi Meyers, love the setup, whatever. Like, it's close with Davante Adams, and like my numbers would lean towards Davante Adams, but like in my heart, I'm just like, give me Jakobi. Like, just like he's the one that I want.
Davante, you're letting it all out here, Freedman.
Yeah,
I like it. You're letting the people hear everything that you've got going on in here, man. This is good stuff this Sunday morning.
All right, let's go to the next one. Question from Daco or Daco, either one. I hope it's not Daco, because that just makes me hurt as a Cowboys fan. Full PPR, must win. Okay, I mean, they're all must wins at this point in the season. Must win start 2, Aaron Jones, Zay Flower, Cedric, Tillman. All right, so Tillman with the Browns coming off of the bye. Tillman has been awesome in his run as the number 1 wide receiver for the Browns. Like, it's to the point to where it's like, maybe he's not just like the number 1 wide receiver for the Browns, but like a legit fantasy wide receiver 1 at this point, based on how he has played. 32 targets in 3 games is what he has seen since the team traded away Amari Cooper. That is like super alpha type of usage, and he's produced with that volume. 255 yards receiving, 3 receiving touchdowns, a 2-point conversion on top of that, 91% route rate, 21% target rate, 24% target share. Like, those are great numbers. And by the way, those numbers are from our industry leading utilization report. Be sure to check that out on the site. The matchup is great going against the Saints. No number 1 cornerback, Marshawn Lattimore, who's been traded away. No number 2 cornerback, Paulson Adebo, who's on IR. Kool-Aid McKinstry, I believe, is coming back for this game, but he's been out since week 9, and I do not believe that he's like actually 100%. There are some weather issues for a few games this week, not for this game. This game is indoors in the supercharged, high-scoring environment of the Superdome. Like, this is a great setup for Cedric Tillman. He's one that I would just sort of like easily just lock in, and then I would make the decision between Aaron Jones and Zay Flowers. What are your thoughts on these 3?
I'd lean a bit more towards Aaron Jones. So Cedric Tillman, you're absolutely right. Probably the gold star out of that group, almost in the same way we were talking about T. Higgins being the name that instantly jumps out of that set of players there. Aaron Jones going up against, they've got the Raiders this week, if memory serves. I do have that matchup correct, right?
Yeah, the Titans.
No,
Aaron
Titans.
Jones
Titans.
going against the Titans.
Yeah, I was looking at the different team. So for this one, slightly tougher matchup, but I would say if you go ahead and take a look at our DVP tool that's available up on the site, going up against the Titans, they do actually they are like bottom 10, bottom 12 in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they do allow at least a decent number of points to pass catching running backs. And that has been how Aaron Jones has made his bread over the past few years, like since he's been in the league. So I give it to him just given the floor of opportunities there. And also, if Sam Darnold is going to be put under pressure, we do know the Titans defensive front can generate pressure at a fairly high rate. I would say that given Aaron Jones's ability in the pass game, I lean a bit more towards him versus Zay Flowers, who should see a decent amount of man coverage against the Steelers secondary. That's how they typically like to play. It might be a tough sledding there for Zay Flowers versus opportunities given for Aaron Jones.
All right, let's look at the next question here. Tyreek Hill or Cedric Tillman? Okay, I get the Hill is ranked higher everywhere, but what's your gut say? All right, good question from LRGJA. Okay, I mean, I have to say, like, it has to, quote unquote, has to be Tyreek Hill. It just sort of has to. But man, like, I feel pretty confident in the target projection for Cedric Tillman at this point. And I will say, like, maybe I shouldn't. I will admit, it's based on a pretty small sample of just 3 games, right? But in those 3 games, we've had 12, 9, and 11 targets. Like, I feel like it's a minimum of 8 targets that he has coming his direction this week. With Tyreek Hill, I mean, obviously Hill is awesome, but like that offense for the Dolphins is, I feel like, still kind of working its way into shape with the return of Tua, and they are relying on the ground game and like the backfield at a pretty high rate at this point. And that makes sense with how great Devon Achane has been. And then also with the matchup, Dolphins hosting the Raiders, Dolphins big favorites at home. You can imagine how they run the ball quite a bit if they get up by a lot. And then correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting to look at my weather website here. In Miami, I believe that we have a forecast for winds that are like above 10 miles per hour. Yeah, looking at it right now, a forecast at 12 miles per hour, which isn't like egregious, but like historically is enough to impact the NFL totals. Like in games where we've had winds of 10 to 15 miles per hour, the under has hit at a pretty high rate, like high enough to have like I think a 12% ROI over like the last 20 years. So it's enough of a wind factor to make a difference potentially in the passing game. And then you look at what Tyreek Hill has done in terms of the targets that he's earned. Just 4 targets last week, just 5 targets the week before that. It's not a great situation for Tyreek Hill in terms of how he has been used. So, yeah, I can see all of that together, like why you would go to Cedric Tillman. That said, it's still Tyreek Hill. He still has to be like a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in the rankings every week. And it would just be really hard for me to start Cedric Tillman over Tyreek Hill. So I go with Tyreek Hill. Just like my brain says, go with Tyreek Hill, the guy who has had like 1,700 yards receiving each of the past 2 years. I would go with him, but projection wise, I would have more targets going to Cedric Tillman. And it is hard for me to go with the guy who's, I think, going to get fewer targets. So I would say it's Tyreek Hill, but I don't feel super about it. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I don't either. I'm almost at the point where it's just play. Well, look, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. We're just going to use the bit. Which player gives you more joy? All right. Cedric Tillman gives me more joy. I'm sorry. He gives me more joy. He has what Tyreek Hill, I think he openly admitted he's going to need some sort of surgery on whatever thing he popped in his wrist. Yeah. Or something earlier this week. So that's a concern. And I would say take the elements out of the equation. Tua hasn't been playing the same way that he was like earlier in the year. One of the things that the offense was predicated on was Tua hitting the last step in his drop and then letting it fly farther down the field. past 3 weeks since he's been back, he's had a passing average depth of target of 5.9, 5.1, and 5.7 yards. This is not the same high-flying offense that we expected to see out of Miami, or we wanted to see, like, or that we thought we were going to get after the first couple of games in the season. So if Tua is hitting the more short and intermediate stuff, Tyreek also has this ligament injury or whatever is going on in his wrist, not really separating from the other pass catchers in terms of target share. We've seen Jalen Waddle pop up for a few targets. We know Johnny Smith gets involved. Devon Achane having somewhere between a 15 and 20% target share. This isn't the same wide receiver one. This isn't the same offense. Whereas we've seen this ascension from Cedric Tillman. So Tillman, just this is more of a vibes-based take. He asked what our gut says. At least to me, my gut is saying Tillman is the better option of those two for this week. But we just know the history.
Let's go back, producer Jacob. Let's go back to that question, because I feel like it is worth contemplating this question a little bit more.
We're navel gazing,
because I feel like it gets to the point of like how it is that you make decisions in fantasy, but also like how it is that you make decisions in your life, right? And so this, I would say, let's not think about like the way that you quote unquote should make decisions, but like let's sort of be real about like every person has ways that they make decisions that are like idiosyncratic to them, you know? And it's like, what is it that will make you regret life less if things don't go well, right? Is it like, if you start Tyreek Hill and he goes off, great. You start Cedric Tillman, he goes off, great, right? But what happens if you start Tyreek Hill and Cedric Tillman goes off and Tyreek Hill doesn't? Are you going to feel, you know what? At least I started my stud. Like I started my stud. I made a sound decision. It didn't work out, but I don't regret it. Or are you going to say, I should have gone with the guy who's gotten more volume, the guy who was going to give me more joy if he hit, right? Like, are you going to regret that more? Or are you going to regret more? You started Cedric Tillman, he didn't go off, but Tyreek Hill go off, and you're going to say like, why did I do it? I should have started my stud. I should have stayed true to the guy who's been awesome for his entire career and who's a Hall of Famer versus the guy who's been great for 3 weeks. You know, like which one is going to limit the degree to which you hate yourself based on the fantasy football decision that you made?
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, if you are someone who tends to think of like, I want to minimize the thing that is going to cause me some amount of emotional stress.
Yeah. After the fact, yeah.
Maybe factor that into your decision making.
Fair. Yeah.
Now I will say, big picture, as decision makers, hopefully we get to the point where we don't take our emotional states into account, right? Hopefully it's like, you know what? I'm just going to make a decision. I'm going to live with it. Like, if it works out, great. I made the best decision I could with the information that I had. If it doesn't work out, fine. I still used a process that makes sense. So if you are an unemotional decision maker, then you don't have to sort of look in the mirror and think, which one of these fates do I want to avoid? But if you are someone who gets really emotionally impacted by things not working out, and then like you sort of hate yourself based on the decisions that you made, maybe factor that in. All right. That's just big picture philosophizing. All right. Next question here. Daniel Whitmore, starting Herbert. So not sure if I should roll with J.K. Dobbins in my flex, which potentially could cap the upside. Could start Reed or D-Hop instead, 10-team half PPR. All right. I love this question. Great question. I tend to have maybe a couple of approaches where I don't mind stacking. And this is kind of like a version of stacking. It is the version of stacking that kind of caps your upside, but you're also thinking, if I have Herbert and I have J.K. Dobbins, I have a pretty good chance of somehow capturing all of the touchdowns scored for the Chargers offense, right? Unless, of course, Gus Edwards gets 2 touchdowns and you just hate yourself. But, you know, J.K. Dobbins gets a touchdown, Justin Herbert runs and scores a touchdown, or Justin Herbert throws 2 to 3 touchdowns, you sort of get all of that fantasy goodness. So if you are in a matchup where you're just kind of looking to capture points that give you a certain floor, then I would be fine with that approach. If, however, you're in a matchup where it's like, you know what, I'm going to need to put up points because I'm going against this other manager whose team is stacked, then maybe in that situation, you're focused on not so much the floor and you don't want to cap your upside as you note here, but you really just kind of want to hope that you hit it. So with all of that said, how are you looking at J.K. Dobbins, Reed, DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah, I mean, they are negatively correlated if you think about having the quarterback and running back on your team, but this is also a team that should be in a game that has a fairly high total. What's the game total for Chargers Bengals at this point?
48. 48
yeah.
is the total, and the Chargers at home favored by 1.5. So pretty good situation there in terms of the amount of points that you would project for them to score. So that is all good. And of course, great environment to some of these games, as I mentioned earlier, have weather issues. Like Green Bay, for instance, has some weather issues going against the Bears. So you like the setup there for the Chargers offense.
Yeah, and so while typically it would be a situation where having the quarterback and running back would lend itself to, if one scores, it's hurting the other. But if this should be a more high scoring environment, and also specific to this matchup, we do know the Bengals have been susceptible to both passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns. Their rushing defense has been one of the worst in the league, bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. You can check that out on our DVP tool available on the site. So having J.K. Dobbins like in your roster, and that's even with Gus Edwards being back, Dobbins was still around 50% of the team's carries just this past week, along with around a 20% target share. Out of no problem starting J.K. Dobbins in this matchup, along with Justin Herbert, who should be able to perform well against Cincinnati's pass defense.
Yeah, so I would go with Dobbins first, and then after that, I would go with Jaden Reed. And I'll say it's close between Dobbins and Reed, but I would go.
Those are the two. Yeah,
I would go Dobbins and then Reed and then DeAndre Hopkins. That's the way I would look at it. All right. From Sterling Dudley, PPR flex spot, Rhamondre Stevenson or Brian Thomas Jr. So Rhamondre Stevenson at home, but the Patriots are underdogs in the spot. Brian Thomas Jr. On the road, massive underdog going against the Lions. And just to verify, right, like it is a situation where with the Jags, Trevor Lawrence did not practice at all this week and
Mac
actually
Jones
has been declared out. So Mac Jones 100% starting in the spot. Man, I'm going with Rhamondre Stevenson, even though I don't like it. I'm going with Stevenson. I think he has a little bit of a higher floor than Thomas, and Thomas's, I think, ceiling is severely capped now that he has Mac Jones at quarterback.
Yeah, that's an easy call right there. Over the past, 6 weeks straight, Rhamondre Stevenson's had more than 50% of the team's carries. Still mixes in for a few targets, like 2-3-ish targets per week as well. So I would rather take, if you even want to look at it from a floor ceiling standpoint, sure, Stevenson has the higher floor, and Brian Thomas Jr., like historically, or at least throughout his rookie season, has probably had the higher ceiling out of the two. But with Mac Jones being the quarterback, you would have to think that the ceiling floor is almost the exact same for Brian Thomas at this point. Yeah. So I would take Rhamondre Stevenson without too much of a hesitation.
Yeah, you look at Thomas with the Jags as 13.5-point underdogs, and you think, all right, they're going to be throwing a lot. And that might be true, but as 13.5-point underdogs, like they might not even have the ball all that much. So they might be throwing at a high rate relative to what they normally do, but the quality of those targets is going to be subpar, and the volume of those targets might not be nearly as much as you would anticipate, just because, I mean, the Lions, once they get the ball, like they can control it with their ground game. And so just negative all around situation for Brian Thomas. The one thing I would say that's good about Brian Thomas is that at least this week he's playing indoors. But like other than that, it's just like this it feels like a very bad environment. All right. Devin Bryant with the question here. Need to Downs, Jennings, or Quentin Johnston full PPR. All right. No Joe Flacco this week as the quarterback for the Colts. So I feel like that is a downgrade for Josh Downs. Still, and then also Michael Pittman Jr. returning this week also impacts the target volume that we should expect for Josh Downs. So entering this week, I was thinking great setup for Josh Downs. No Michael Pittman. He's got Joe Flacco, and he's going against what I would say is like the worst cornerback on the Jets in Michael Carter Jr., who's having like the worst season of his career, in the slot there with Josh Downs. But now the situation for Josh Downs doesn't look nearly as good. So then it just makes me think, all right, I'm much more interested now in Jauan Jennings and even Quentin Johnston, who isn't like the reliable target earner that we would want, but still has like been much better this year than he was last year. And so I feel like he's a legitimate candidate to be in the mix here. But how are you looking at these three guys, Downs, Jennings, Quentin Johnston?
I think for Jauan Jennings specifically, and I see a couple of folks noting in the chat, George Kittle's supposed to be out this week, or at least trending in that direction. I don't remember seeing an official report on whether or not he's going to be out. But if that's the case, or if he is going to be extremely limited, it does lend itself to Jauan Jennings being the guy to roster out of this group, at least for one of those two. Even just last week with him playing more of the X receiver role for the 49ers with CMC being back, 33% of the team's targets in week 10. And that's with them coming out of their bye and having CMC back into the offense. We saw him essentially like leading the wide receiver core with Deebo Samuel dealing with whatever ailments are probably like he's had the calf earlier in this week. He was sick a few weeks ago with the pneumonia thing. But then seeing him coming out and having that level of target share in that offense and going up against Seattle's secondary, which we've known has been susceptible to deep passes and intermediate crossers, I'd say Jauan Jennings and Quentin Johnston, like we just mentioned, going up against the Bengals secondary, those two stick out to me, whereas we don't have any concerns about their quarterback. We don't have any concerns about the scoring environment. And for Jauan Jennings and Quentin Johnston, that's it. Those are about as simple of an approach to fantasy football as possible. Whereas with Downs, we don't know what Anthony Richardson is going to look like. We do have the Jets secondary. Even if he is going against the slot corner, we do have that to worry about. I would say we don't have those same concerns for QJ or Jauan Jennings.
Yeah, good call, everyone, on Kittle. Yeah, the report from Adam Schefter, Kittle unlikely to play in Week 11 against the Seahawks. The team is still planning on having Kittle test out the hamstring in pregame warmups. But yeah, definitely cannot depend on Kittle, which means that would impact Jauan Jennings, who could have an extra 2 to 3 targets coming his way. Potentially. So Jennings, for sure, the one that I would be locking in there. Question from Cody Lambert. Shout out Cody, who I think has participated in the questions before. All right, here we go. Allen or Purdy today, full PPR. I don't think the PPR factor comes into it. That would be awesome if it somehow did come into it with like Josh Allen getting a reception on the trick play here. Okay, so you have Allen at home, the Bills favored against the Chiefs in what certainly feels like the game of the day. And then you have Brock Purdy, who has basically been a Josh Allen-esque type of player. And I hate to say that because it sounds like I'm being ridiculous. But if you just like look at how Purdy has played this year, he's running at a much higher rate. So that kind of gives him that elevated rushing floor. And then he's passing, I mean, really well. Like passing has never been the question with Brock Purdy, but now he's attacking a little bit more downfield. Granted, we just talked about the absence of Kittle in this game. No Brandon Ayuk, but he still has enough weapons around him with Samuel, with Jennings, with Ricky Pearsall, their rookie first rounder, and then of course the return of Christian McCaffrey. I feel like this is tough. I mean, I honestly want to say Brock Purdy. I mean, I feel like I would need to look at my rankings. I feel like I probably have just like from a start your studs perspective, I probably have Josh Allen ranked a little bit higher, but I think Purdy is right there. I have Josh Allen at 3. I have Brock Purdy at 5. Man, I'm so weak. I am so weak. I would start Josh Allen, but like my gut says Purdy. My projections would probably say Purdy.
Yes, and I agree with you there, because I'm looking at, we have Dwayne McFarland, our projections pulled up here. Dwayne has Brock Purdy projected for a few points more than Josh Allen. But I would say, though, with the rushing ability that Josh Allen brings to the table, and against the Chiefs defense that we know can wind up generating some pressure, we could see a number of scenarios where, or a number of plays where the pocket breaks down and Josh Allen scrambles for 30, 40, 50 yards and winds up plunging one in for a touchdown. So while I think the general concerns around the Bills passing game are, you're not going to have Keon Coleman for a downfield threat perspective. You're not going to have Dalton Kincaid, even though folks that have been rostering Dalton Kincaid probably don't care one way or the other if he's not going to be there, because haven't been able to get much production out of him anyway. But fewer pass catchers makes things tougher for quarterbacks. That makes the margins all the more slim for quarterbacks. But if we know Josh Allen can be that rushing quarterback, just put on a Superman cape and make it happen with whomever, he can just wind up dunking on the Chiefs defense with Mac Hollins for a long touchdown, something along those lines. So I think in this case, if it was more like that same gut question we got about Tyreek Hill versus Cedric Tillman, I would say Josh Allen. Like, my gut says Josh Allen, just because we know Josh Allen can do Josh Allen things. But if you just want to go straight with the projections, Brock Purdy with his pass catchers mostly healthy, I mean, minus George Kittle, it makes some sense. But I lean towards Josh Allen.
Let's stick with this question just a little bit more, because I think it fundamentally gets to some of the things of like, what are you looking at for fantasy? Like, what is it that you are specifically chasing? And so, yeah, looking at my projections, I actually do have Allen projected about half a point higher than Brock Purdy. So even just like the median projection, I would say Josh Allen. My rankings, I would say Josh Allen. Now, and here's the kicker, and you touched on this, the ceiling. If you had to say which one of these guys has a better chance of putting up 40 points, like, it's Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Josh Allen can do it almost like single-handedly because of the running ability. And then also because like sometimes Josh Allen is just like, oh, look, there's an 80-yard touchdown to Mac Hollins, right? Mm-hmm. Like he can do that. And so if you're thinking about like in terms of like the median range of outcome, both of these guys are basically in the same tier at this point. They're equivalent in terms of like, 19.5 points for Brock Purdy, 20 points for Josh Allen. Like, you're not really splitting hairs between those two. You don't care about that little of a difference. What you care about is which one of these guys has the best chance of just going off. And I would say that has to be Josh Allen, even though I think Brock Purdy is an underappreciated quarterback who is slowly becoming more and more appreciated. I still think it has to be Josh Allen, but love that question from Cody. Yeah. All right. Question from Johnny38. With Kyler Murray on bye, which quarterback would you stream? Aaron Rodgers, Drake May, Kirk Cousins, or Jameis Winston? Okay. Great question here. Aaron Rodgers, Jets, they're on the road playing the Chargers, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. What was that? Oh, the Colts. You are correct. They're hosting the Colts. I was thinking of the Bengals there. Okay. So yes. So you have Jameis Winston coming off of the bye, playing in the hashtag revenge game against the Saints. You have Drake May at home, with better running ability than a lot of other quarterbacks in the league, playing against the Rams. Kirk Cousins on the road playing tough matchup against the Broncos. Aaron Rodgers with the Jets playing the Colts. How are you looking at those four guys?
The two that instantly stuck out were Drake May and Jameis Winston. I'll give the edge to Winston at this point because we talked earlier about Cedric Tillman, and also you laid out the case for not just Tillman, but essentially the rest of the pass catchers, given the number of injuries to the Saints secondary from no Marshawn Lattimore, Kool-Aid McKinstry, all of Paulson Adeba, all of those guys. So even with the offensive line concerns for the Browns right now, they do have a couple of starters that have been banged up throughout over the past couple of weeks. I would say given the Winston's aggression as a passer and also the pass catchers that we do want associated with the Browns offense so far, from Tillman. I'm sure some folks might be looking at Elijah Moore because since he plays in the slot, David Njoku. So I would say Jameis Winston and also the rushing ability from Drake May. Second highest scrambling rate in the league right now. That's just behind fellow classmate Jaden Daniels. I would say those two are the guys that stick out. Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins at Denver, Patrick Surtain going up against Drake London, all of that stuff. I would say leave the pocket passes out. I'll take the guy that has the rushing ability, always down for the Konami code, and then 2, I'll take the guy that should have at least a easier path to generating passing yards against a weak secondary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for me, agree with that. It's Winston or May. I think I have the slightest of leans towards Winston playing indoors. Browns now favored going against a weakened secondary, but I can see Drake May, and honestly, I have them right next to each other in my rankings.
Yeah.
I would say, pick your poison. If you prefer the guy who has the running ability, I would go with Drake May. Yeah. Okay. Next question here. Juwan Jennings, JMO, or JSN, pick one for the flex. Rocket ship, fire emoji.
I love it.
Okay. Juwan Jennings, we talked about him earlier. Really intriguing now. No Brandon Ayuk, of course, but then also expected no George Kittle per Adam Schefter. Jameson Williams, massive favorite at home.
Yeah.
So like you think like, okay, how is it that Jameson Williams is going to get there? It has to be a long touchdown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think he's going to get a ton of volume in a game that the betting market has going 13.5 points towards the Lions. Of course, the matchup against the Jags, very friendly for wide receivers. So you have to balance that. JSN, diminished possibilities now that
Metcalf?
more. Yeah. DK Metcalf. I know now that DK Metcalf is returning out of the bye week. So how are you looking at those 3?
Jameson Williams is actually the cover boy of my wide receiver cornerbacks matchup column for this week. And I know that for Jameson Williams, he typically falls into the archetype of receivers that he is the Deshaun Jackson. He is the Rashid Shaheed. He is the guy that catches one pass for a long touchdown. And that's how he makes his fantasy production. But I would say, and I noted this in the column, is that the underlying story, the thing we talked the least coming out of that game, because all the interceptions, was the larger storyline for the Detroit game this past week. Jameson Williams came back and walked right into a 22% target share. And now with Sam Laporta supposed to be out this week with the shoulder injury, that should open up a few more targets for the pass catchers. Now, given the game environment, to your point, Freedman, you just mentioned that the Lions, they are heavy favorites in this game. So it could be another game where we see Jared Goff pass for, 84 yards in a game, and the passing game gets completely scripted out of the contest. Yeah. But in order for them to get to those number of points where they are relying more on the running game, I would expect a few shots downfield. And Jameson Williams going up against the Jaguars offense that's allowed the most yards per game on throws of more than 20 air yards or more so far this season. Jameson Williams is the guy I think sticks out the most out of that group, at least for me.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned great matchup. Like elite matchup going against a really poor pass defense for the Jags, and no Sam Laporta means Jameson Williams could have some extra targets coming his way. It's just the fact that they are favored by so many points. Right, I am worried about it just becoming a run heavy game to where it's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, and everyone in the passing game just kind of gets scripted out, except for Amon-Ra St. Brown, who still has like a touchdown. His like touchdown streak continues, but it's like he gets like 17 yards. So I would go with Juwan Jennings with the George Kittle news, with Kittle expected out. All right, Guillotine, interesting. Love that format. Shout out to the Guillotine crew that we have at Fantasy Life. I'm in a Guillotine league. Honestly, it's my first time really focusing on Guillotine. I was in a Guillotine league last year. My team sucked. I was out of it by week 2. Like I did like the barbell approach to where it's like, this team is either going to suck or it's going to survive just a little bit and it's going to really get stronger as the season goes along. It didn't work out for me. I took a different approach this year. My team is really good. Love the Guillotine format. Everyone should check it out, especially since it is part of Fantasy Life. All right, Guillotine, Stroud versus Burrow. We talked about the Bengals a little bit, playing in the environment of indoors, LA. Tougher matchup against the Chargers defense, but you also kind of have to ask yourself, how real is this Chargers defense? It has had a number of advantageous matchups. Burrow locked in to being a top 5 quarterback for me. CJ Stroud has disappointed to this point in the year. But you would assume that the offense for the Texans starts to look more like we would have expected with the return of Nico Collins this week.
Yeah.
I'm pretty strongly going towards Burrow. CJ Stroud going against the Cowboys could just fall into production, but it might be another game where the run game just takes over for the Texans, given that they kind of lean in that direction philosophically anyway. And then as 7.5 point favorites against the Cowboys Monday Night Football, they might not need to throw the ball all that much, which could limit the production for Stroud. I would go with Burrow. What are you thinking here?
I also lean towards Burrow, and that again, Bengals bias aside, for the Cowboys, Deron Bland, foot injury, DNP earlier this week. Trayvon Diggs, he did get in full practices, but is still listed on the injury report with a calf injury. So I get the Stroud questions, and especially having Nico Collins back, he should get back to the early season production that we expected. But with you mentioned it, but the Chargers, they've been noted as being one of the more stingy defenses in the league so far. But if you just go back and look at some of their like the quarterbacks that they face, who was it they faced last week? They went up against like Will Levis in what was his first game back since the shoulder injury. They faced Jameis Winston and that pass catching group. But then before that, they had Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. The week before that, it was they did have Kyler Murray, limited him, but then so it's like they haven't really faced a ton of just like top end quarterbacks like so far. Burrow, I'd say, would be one of their tougher tests. So I give it to Burrow just the way that the offense is playing so far. And of course, getting T. Higgins back, I would say, allows them to be a bit more flexible on offense and rely on their top 2 pass catchers. Whereas with Stroud, he gets Nico back, but we haven't seen really the ceiling outcome for Tank Dell. He hasn't been really there like so far this season without Stephon Diggs. I'm kind of out. I think I think Texans will win. But from a fantasy standpoint, give me Burrow over Stroud every day.
Yeah, the real tragedy in that Cowboys game is not even so much that the Cowboys are just going to get dog walked, although that's definitely going to happen. Cowboys 2-7 against the spread this year, just absolutely terrible. But we're not going to get the Diggs on Diggs matchup that we would have gotten if it would have been Stephon Diggs versus his brother. And to your point, and this is what makes Stroud much more interesting. You mentioned Deron Bland out, Diggs injured. Going to play, but injured, definitely not at 100%. And then Jordan Lewis, the slot cornerback for the Cowboys, he's also out. So a bad Cowboys defense that is now really injured at the cornerback position. I mean, the Cowboys certainly exploitable, but that Chargers defense, it's better than it was last year. I don't think there's any question about that. But you look at the quarterbacks they faced to start the year: Gardner Minshew, Bryce Young, Justin Fields. You look at the quarterbacks that they have faced in the past 3 weeks: Jake Haener / Spencer Rattler, Jameson Winston, Will Levis. Like they have had a wonderful run of quarterbacks. Yeah. This is a different type of quarterback that they are playing this week in Joe Burrow. All right, next question here. Need a tight end. Henry, Hill, or Knox? Thanks. So we talked about Henry versus Hill as like the first question that we had on the show. I still prefer Taysom Hill in that spot. Just fantastic opportunity for usage given the lack of wide receivers that the Saints have, and then also how injured their backfield is. You would think that there's a very good chance that Taysom Hill gets the customary 4 to 6 carries with one of those good opportunity at the goal line. So then it basically comes down to Hill, or do you think of maybe Dawson Knox as like someone who has the outsized opportunity for targets with no Dalton Kincaid in front of him, Keon Coleman also injured, and Amari Cooper dealing with the wrist injury. No guarantee that Amari Cooper plays in this game. I still go towards Taysom Hill, but I can see why someone might be able to talk themselves into Dawson Knox. What are your thoughts on those three guys?
All right there, like fairly close to each other. You can see we have the Fantasy Life consensus rankings pulled up. Taysom Hill falls into tier 2, and for the exact reasons you lined out, Freedman. He has the easier path to not just being a receiver, but also a rusher for the Saints, given their limited weapons as well. And also we can see him throw a pass or two. So with Dawson Knox going up against the Chiefs, tight ends they've actually performed fairly well against the Chiefs. We saw Kate Otten get there on some decent volume a few weeks ago. So I would say that, like, if you can talk yourself into that situation, I would say Dawson Knox, but I think Hill is probably the easiest one out of that group to roster.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say like the difference between Knox and Henry feels not that large. Like I would say,
Yeah,
I think of them as probably being in the same tier. I do think of Hill as being in a tier above those guys.
agree.
All right. So next question that we have here, Etienne, Dell, or Jameson Williams, half PPR. All right. So we talked about Etienne earlier, with no Tank Bigsby, possibly the opportunity for Etienne to end up having a decent sized workload, even though the Jags are massive underdogs on the road. And then you have Tank Dell. Haven't talked about him yet. No Stephon Diggs. That's great. The return of Nico Collins, not so great for Tank Dell, just in terms of projected volume that he could have. But I mean, that offense with Nico Collins maybe opens up a little bit more, is a little more functional, and maybe that helps balance out for Tank Dell. And then we just talked about the great matchup going against the Cowboys. No Deron Bland, no Jordan Lewis, an injured Diggs at cornerback. So overall, good situation for Tank Dell. And then you mentioned Jameson Williams earlier, on the other side of that matchup with Travis Etienne, massive favorite at home, great matchup against a poor Jags pass defense, but at the same time could potentially be game scripted out just
Right.
because the Lions are favored by so much. How are you looking at those three guys?
And I guess now that we've talked about the Texans Cowboys matchup a bit, can you see a similar case for Tank Dell in terms of the passing game could get scripted out there as well? We could see Joe Mixon getting into the end zone a couple of times, maybe a few catches here and there for whether it's Nico Collins, maybe Dalton Schultz gets mixed in, to the point where we don't see a ton of production from any of the pass catchers, but somehow the Texans put up 20 some odd points on the Cowboys, and it's really not much of a back and forth, or at least a fantasy conducive type of matchup. I could see the same thing for Dell. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that could happen. But man, it's tough because I'm looking at all three of these guys who have the risk of being game scripted out.
Yeah.
So it makes it tough to choose one. I lean, man, I lean towards Etienne a little bit, but what are your thoughts?
That's kind of where I'm at, and I would say for full context, or if we wanted to add another wrinkle to this, go back to your Thursday night matchup. Let's say if you started one of the guys from that game and they underperformed, or if you went up against Saquon Barkley and now you're really finding yourself behind, that might help you in terms of making your decision. So if you did face Saquon Barkley and you need some upside and you need to inject some punch into your lineup, Jameson Williams would be the one to stick out. If everything's sitting 0-0 or whatever, then maybe Etienne might be the one, or Etienne or Dell might be the guys that you would want to roster more so than Jameson Williams, who either one of the wide receivers might get game scripted out. That's how I would approach that.
Okay. I agree with that. I like that thought. If you're chasing the ceiling, Jameson Williams, because he clearly has it based on the matchup and the expected points with the Lions there. If you're chasing the floor, maybe Travis Etienne, who has a decent chance of getting 10 plus touches in this game. All right. Last question here. We appreciate everyone who has joined us for the Week 11 live stream. Chase Brown or Walker? Also Chase Brown.
We haven't talked about them yet.
Kareem Hunt, PPR. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So Chase Brown, I mean, now the guy in the backfield there for the Bengals. Kareem Hunt, always like Kareem Hunt. In terms of efficiency, it's just not there for him. But efficiency doesn't really matter when a guy is getting, I don't know, like 20 plus opportunities in every game. And then Kenneth Walker, we haven't talked about him yet. Tough matchup, 6.5 as an underdog going against the 49ers. How are you looking at these three guys? I mean, I think they're all pretty close here.
Yeah, and I like Kareem Hunt's situation slightly a bit more because of his usage once they get inside the 5, inside the 10. Not to say that Chase Brown like rotates out or we have any sort of concern for Khalil Herbert after he got moved over from Chicago, but I could see a scenario where we do get more of the Chiefs like moving into the red zone and more of those plays where that are a bit more conducive to Kareem Hunt like finding himself in the box versus Chase Brown, because we're looking at the pass catchers for the Bengals. We're looking at T. Higgins. Everybody's always going to be looking to Jamar Chase. So I would say that Kareem Hunt out of that group is probably the one that I'm looking at. Whereas with Walker going up against the 49ers defensive front, not the easiest task to go up against. And now I know Walker might get a few more targets, which has been kind of the thing that's elevated him into the RB1 conversation this season, because we thought coming into the 2024 season, it was going to be a split between Walker getting more of the base down work, short yardage stuff, and maybe Zach Charbonnet mixing in for receptions. And that like Walker has really taken over that role. But going up against 49ers, tough out for him. I think Kareem Hunt is probably the one out of those three that I would take.
All right. So I have honestly all of these guys in the same tier. I'm looking at the rankings right now. I have Chase Brown at 12, Walker at 13, Kareem Hunt at 15. Like these guys are basically all the same. What I like about Chase Brown is that he doesn't have any Zach Moss to deal with. So like he's really the guy there. Kareem Hunt, man, I just have to say before the show ends, like the spot for the Chiefs is really intriguing. So still no Isaiah Pacheco. You mentioned the goal line usage. Kareem Hunt has been playing about half of the season, and he is tied with an NFL high 13 goal line carries.
That's
like, I mean, like he is getting premium usage. Yeah. And since he became the starter in week 5, 480 yards, 5 touchdowns, 111 carries, 15 targets and 5 games. Like he is getting premium usage, and it's easy to look at the Chiefs offense and be like, they are just not functioning at peak capacity, and that's fine. Kareem Hunt is still being used like a true bell cow within that offense. And then you can look at the Chiefs and say like, you know what? They're on the road. They're underdogs. The mind-blowing stat of the century. Patrick Mahomes is 10-0-1 against the spread as a road underdog. As a road dog, 10-0-1. Basically, Mahomes should never be a dog. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. Mahomes as a road underdog on the money line. So just outright 9-2 on the money line. Like at any time Mahomes has been a road underdog, it's, still about 80% chance his team is going to win the game. Yeah. The Bills number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs. So great setup there for Kareem Hunt. And still no Matt Milano, who has returned to practice, but no linebacker position there is in terms of strength for the Bills. Matt Milano out, Balin Spector out. So the Bills still without 2 of their top 3 off-ball linebackers. Kareem Hunt, like I know that I do not have him ranked up there with Chase Brown or Walker. Like it's close, but he's the 3rd for me. But still, like Kareem Hunt, if you went with him, I would not hate that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you to everyone for participating in the Week 11 Fantasy Life live stream. If we were not able to get to your question, check out the free start sit tool that we have on the site. Check out the rankings that we have on the site. Check out all of the free content. Chris has his wide receiver cornerback matchup piece. I have all of the positional breakdowns. And of course, if you are a premium Fantasy Life Plus subscriber, check out the projections that we have on the site, the player projections, and then also the game projections that we have. We update those all the way to kickoff. So everyone, be sure to check out that stuff. And of course, best of luck to you in all of your fantasy endeavors this week. And we will see you next week.
Peace.